Hi everyone, this is a remote viewing 5-year forecast for two new cryptocurrencies that we are calling CICO 13 and CICO 14. As usual, both are currently inexpensive, despite having very different projections. We have done a great many studies on new cryptocurrencies that we hoped would survive and thrive into the future. And in general, we have found that most of them do not do well in the long run in terms of adoption. We decided to look at two cryptocurrencies this month that have some stuff in common, but fundamentally they perform differently over the 5-year duration of our forecast. CICO stands for Contemporary Investigations of Cryptocurrency Opportunities. Again, the purpose of our CICO forecasts is to attempt to use remote viewing in the context of our economic forecasting methods to determine the likelihood that a cryptocurrency will survive and thrive into the future. We are trying to focus on cryptocurrencies where their initial cost per coin is generally small and the potential for growth is rather significant. We offer our CICO forecasts free to the public to watch as videos on YouTube, but the real name of the currency in the forecast has been changed so that the name referenced in the video is fictional. Potential investors can watch the forecast to see if they want to purchase the actual identity of the currency during the forecast period. While we have begun our CICO forecast by publishing results for coins for which we obtained positive results, we now intend to publish a wider range of forecasts. We have moved to something that is more like a subscription model, where those people who purchase one of our CICO forecast identities also get identities for other CICO forecasts that are available and current through the end of the year 2021. There is no extra cost for this. CICO forecasts typically are for 5 years or more. We occasionally update the forecasts, which usually extends the forecast further into the future. This allows us to share our results that are not good, which theoretically allows people to dump currencies from their portfolios that look like they will not survive. But again, in our research, some currencies did come back with strong and positive results. CICO 14 is one of those currencies for which we have obtained positive results. However, CICO 13's results were a bit lackluster. For these CICO studies, we normally probe for adoption, and that is whether a significant number of people and institutions start to use the currency. The theory is that if the currency survives and people use that currency, then it would be a good investment. So let me outline what we did for this study for CICO 13 and 14. This experimental design has two parts for the target, which is what the viewers are supposed to perceive. The first is known now, and that is a base surface that has unique topographical elements. The second part of the target is made up of additional elements that are added to the target after the date of the forecasting period using CGI software. We have a video on our website on the Farsight forecasting method that was used for this study, and that video describes how all of this works. In our studies, there is a possibility of up to 11 elements that can be placed in the target using CGI software 5 years into the future, and our remote viewers are describing what the target looks like in 5 years. After it is assembled using CGI software, the rules of how those elements are employed in the target creation process exist now, and those rules are tied to how the currency performs during the forecast period. So, when our viewers describe what the target looks like in the future, we now know how the currency performs. For CICO 14, our 4 viewers described the future target as having 4, 3, 2, and 5 additional elements out of a possible of 11 elements that are added to the base target. Normally, targets which have 3 or 4 added elements are good indicators of positive growth. Initially, we utilize an aggregated version of the temperature probe analysis for this CICO. Temperature probe analysis is normally used to obtain direction indicators for specific timelines, such as week to week, month to month, or year to year. The aggregation method helps centralize the timeline measurements so that we have one measure for the entire forecast period, rather than week to week or year to year, and so on. This tends to increase the accuracy of the temperature probe analysis, and it allows us to obtain an independent measure for the aggregated CICO change. We can then compare this with the measure obtained using complexity analysis. So let's focus on CICO 14, for which we have obtained positive results. However, the results are a bit complicated, so I ask you to listen carefully. Timing seems to be really important for this CICO, with different results occurring for the first and second halves of the forecast period. With respect to the overall results across the entire 5-year forecast period for CICO 14, the aggregated temperature probe analysis helps us to interpret the complexity analysis. More specifically, there are 24 measurements for temperature that were mapped to changes in the adoption of this currency. For the 24 measures of temperature, 19 are positive and 12 are negative. If you weigh these measurements by the actual perceived temperatures, then the numbers are 37 positive and 14 negative. Thus, the aggregated temperature probe analysis corresponds well enough with the complexity analysis to indicate that CICO 14 does find a significant user base with a rise in adoption over the next 5 years. However, the picture seems more and more clear and stronger once you divide the forecast up into two parts, the first half and the second half. The first half of the forecast period appears to do much better than the second half. That is, the negative and positive indicators for this CICO do not occur randomly throughout the entire 5-year forecast period. Rather, the negative indicators for CICO 14 seem to all occur during the second half of the projected forecast. So, our results seem to indicate very positive results between now, June 2021, and the end of the summer, 2023, and perhaps extending to the end of 2023. But after that, CICO 14 appears to become a time bomb with respect to adoption. All of our negative indicators suggest a downward movement in the cryptocurrency's adoption that occurs during the second half of the forecast period. So, if I were looking at these remote viewing results personally, that is to say for myself, I would be very cautious about holding any CICO 14 investments after the end of the summer of 2023, or at least December of 2023. Now for a numerical comparison with respect to our other CICO projects, if we average the number of elements perceived by each remote viewer and divide that by the total possible elements for the target, we get the proportion of total possible elements that a viewer receives. Then we can average that proportion across all of the viewers to get an overall index for the currency that ranges from 0 to 1. An index number of 1 would mean that the viewers perceived every possible element that could be used in the forecast, and that means that a currency would be very, very popular and be adopted by an exceptionally large community. An index number of 0 would actually mean the opposite, which is that the viewers perceived no additional elements over and above the base surface, which would mean that the currency would be expected to perform quite badly in terms of adoption. For our CICO 1 currency, that index number is 0.66. For our CICO 2 currency, that index number is 0.725. For our CICO 3 currency, that index number is 0.575. For CICO 4, that number is 0.567. For CICO 6, that is 0.389. For CICO 9, that is 0.472. And finally, for CICO 14, that number is 0.318. When combined with the positive indicators for aggregate temperature probe analysis, this indicates a significantly strong case for the rise of an adoption for CICO 14 between now, June 2021, and a little past the halfway point for the forecast, which is approximately at the end of the summer of 2023. Or perhaps as late as December of 2023. Our remote viewing results are positive for CICO 14 in terms of adoption, at least in terms of the first half of the 5-year forecast period. This does not guarantee that the currency will perform well as forecasted, but given that now we have multiple remote viewing sessions done by very experienced remote viewers that all indicate that the currency's future performance is strong, this suggests that the future timelines for this currency are in general very positive. Again, at least in terms of the first half of the forecast period. One last point, this currency is relatively inexpensive currently. My own thought is it is best to keep the currency for the first half of the forecast period, or at least until one sees a substantial return in one's investment. But I would not personally keep the currency beyond the end of 2023. And remember, this is not day trading where you buy in the morning and sell in the afternoon, and the exact timing of the upward and downward movements need to be known down to the hour or minute. Remind yourself that this is a 5-year forecast. As mentioned briefly before, CICO 13, in comparison, did not yield strong indicators of positive growth like CICO 14 did. The positive results are for CICO 14 and CICO 14 only. The negative results are for CICO 13. And remember our disclaimer. No one at Farsight is a licensed financial advisor, so anything that anyone at Farsight does that relates to the using of remote viewing to predict financial or economic outcomes of any type, including performance, however defined, or selling prices of cryptocurrencies, stocks, commodities, or anything else, is done for entertainment and educational purposes only. Everyone doing investments are doing so at their own risk. These are experiments in remote viewing, and there are no guarantees or warranties being made, either expressed or implied. Nonetheless, these efforts are truly interesting on a grand scale, and we at Farsight believe that after we do this for a while, it will be hard for anyone to ignore the reality of remote viewing. As we have said in the past, may you follow your own intuitions, make wise investment decisions, and become rich. Thank you for supporting our efforts at Farsight. Together, we will change the world for the better. I am Aziz Brown from Farsight.